Two giants, one space, no audience, no cameras rolling. Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung. Say those names in any martial arts gym anywhere on the planet and watch what happens to the room. People stop. People lean in. Because everyone knows the movie. Everyone has seen Enter the Dragon. Everyone has watched those two men exist in the same cinematic universe and felt the electricity of what could have been. But here's what nobody talks about at the dinner table. What doesn't make the documentaries, what gets whispered between people who were actually there. The real encounter, not the choreographed one, not the Hollywood version with lighting rigs and camera angles and a director yelling cut. The raw one, the honest one, the one where two completely different human philosophies about what fighting actually is collided in a room with no script and no safety net. Today you're getting the truth about what happened between Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung when the cameras stopped and the real test began. And what that encounter revealed will change how you think about strength, speed, and what martial arts mastery genuinely looks like. Let's go. Before you can understand the fight, you have to understand the fire that started it. And that fire had a very specific origin point. A decision made by men in suits, sitting in offices far from any martial arts gym, who understood profit margins better than they understood combat. Enter the Dragon, 1973. Bruce wasn't just making a film, he was constructing a monument. This was his grand statement to the world. The project where he intended to tear away every Hollywood stereotype about Asian fighters and replace it with something undeniable. Real technique, real speed, real philosophy translated into moving images that audiences could feel in their bodies rather than just process with their eyes. He poured everything he had into it. His training, his beliefs, his years of questioning and rebuilding and refining, all of it funneled into this one production. And within that vision, he had a specific idea for Bolo Yeung. Not just a villain, a philosophical counterargument. Bolo's character would embody one complete worldview. Traditional power, physical dominance, the ancient answer to the ancient question of what makes a fighter dangerous. And Bruce's character would represent the counter-thesis. Fluidity, adaptability, intelligence over mass. The fight between them was supposed to be a visual debate, each exchange making an argument, each moment carrying the weight of something larger than two men hitting each other. He spent weeks designing it. Then Warner Brothers made a phone call. The studio had its own logic. Keep the emotional focus on one climactic confrontation. Bruce versus the main villain in the mirror room. Multiple major fight sequences would scatter the audience's attention, dilute the impact, weaken the finale. The decision was made. Bolo's screen time was cut. The philosophical battle that Bruce had architected so carefully was gone. For Bruce, this was artistic injury. For Bolo, it felt like something more personal. He had come to this production as a genuine martial artist, a legitimate champion, a man who had built something real with his body and his training. Being reduced to background menace stung, and in the gap between what should have happened on screen and what actually did, something else began to grow. To understand what these two men brought to that moment, you need to go all the way back to where they started. Because Bruce Lee and Bolo Yeung didn't just have different fighting styles. They came from different planets. Bruce's story begins in San Francisco, 1940, though Hong Kong is where he found himself. At 13 years old, navigating the streets of that city taught him something no curriculum ever could. That theory without application is decoration. Street reality had no patience for beautiful forms that didn't work. He found Wing Chun under Ip Man, one of the greatest teachers of his generation, and he absorbed it. But Bruce was constitutionally incapable of absorbing anything without interrogating it first. Why this angle? Why this distance? What actually happens when this meets real resistance? That questioning nature made him dangerous in training rooms and revolutionary in martial arts history. By the time he returned to America at 18 with almost nothing in his pocket, he had already begun dismantling the conventional wisdom about how fighting should be taught. He opened schools. He accepted Western students at a time when traditional Chinese masters considered that nearly treasonous. He pulled from boxing, from fencing, from wrestling, from anything that passed the only test he cared about: does it work? The result was Jeet Kune Do, not a style, an anti-style, a living methodology that refused to calcify into dogma. Bolo Yeung's origin runs in the opposite direction entirely. Born in 1946 in Guangzhou, China, He came up through classical martial arts training the traditional way. Patient, disciplined, repetitive, deeply respectful of what had been passed down through generations. Where Bruce treated tradition as a starting point to be interrogated, Bolo treated it as something to be perfected and then enhanced. His particular enhancement was bodybuilding, an unusual passion in 1960s China, almost eccentric, but Bolo recognized something that most people in both worlds missed. Traditional martial arts precision combined with a bodybuilder's developed musculature created something that didn't exist anywhere else. He won the Mr. Hong Kong Bodybuilding Championship and then kept winning it for a decade straight. Not because nobody tried to take it from him, because nobody could. Two men, two completely different definitions of what a martial artist should be. One optimized for speed, adaptability, and economy of motion. The other built for power, intimidation, and the overwhelming force of traditional technique, backed by extraordinary physical development. On the set of Enter the Dragon, these two worldviews shared a space every single day, and everyone around them felt what that generated. The cast of that production read like a who's who of people who understood exactly what they were watching. Jim Kelly, international middleweight karate champion, observed the dynamic between Bruce and Bolo during downtime. He'd been around elite fighters his entire life. He knew the language they speak without speaking, the way genuine competitors circle each other, the demonstrations that look casual but aren't, the physical conversations happening beneath the surface of ordinary professional interaction. Each man was making statements. Each was responding to the others. No words necessary. Bob Wall, who worked intimately with both men on the film's choreography, watched their completely different methodologies operate side by side. Bruce approached fight sequences the way a scientist approaches an experiment. Meticulous, controlled, every variable considered, every movement serving a specific purpose. Bolo approached training like a force of nature being directed, raw and overwhelming and impossible to ignore. Wall understood that what he was witnessing was a living argument about the fundamental nature of combat. The argument had been going on for centuries. Now it had faces, even the younger fighters on set. Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung, working as stuntmen before they became legends in their own right, absorbed everything they could from both men. Bruce's demonstrations showed them speed that seemed to exist outside the normal rules of human movement. Bolo's strength exhibitions showed them something equally difficult to believe, just in the opposite direction. Two different kinds of impossible, two different roads to mastery. When Warner Brothers made their decision final, and Bolo's role was officially, irrevocably reduced, the professional tension became something more charged, and Bolo made a decision of his own. He issued a challenge. Direct, unambiguous, with real stakes, not choreography, not rehearsal, real sparring, real contact, real combat between two real fighters with genuine skills and genuine pride. Some people on set thought the challenge itself was the boldest thing they had ever witnessed, challenging Bruce Lee, not the movie character, but the actual human being who had spent his entire adult life developing the most efficient fighting methodology anyone had encountered. But Bolo had his reasons. His scene had been erased, his contribution minimized. He needed to know something, not for the cameras, not for Warner Brothers, for himself. Could his power overcome that speed? Could the traditional overcome the revolutionary? Could he, the champion, the powerhouse, the man who had physically dominated everyone he had ever faced, compete with the man who had made speed and strategy into something approaching science? Bruce said yes without hesitation. His philosophy demanded it. Jeet Kune Do had always claimed to be more than theory, more than demonstration, more than impressive movements performed for admiring audiences. It claimed to be truth, and truth needs to be tested against resistance, not just celebrated in agreement. What happened in that room answered the question definitively. From the opening moments, Bruce established the terms through movement rather than words. He made distance the first battleground. Bolo's strategy required proximity. Get close, land something significant, let the strength do what strength does. But every time Bolo moved to close the gap closed itself again. Bruce's footwork wasn't defensive. It was controlling. He wasn't running, he was dictating geography, forcing Bolo to spend energy chasing a target that understood angles better than he did. The strikes Bruce landed weren't the kind designed to end a fight in one moment. They were designed to accumulate. Precise contact to the ribs, clean shots to the body, measured pressure applied to exactly the places where it would compound over time rather than demand immediate payment. Bolo absorbed them. His durability was real. But absorption has a cost, and Bruce was charging interest on every exchange. 5 minutes in, something the observers noticed before Bolo fully registered it himself. His breathing had changed. The massive muscular frame that made him physically imposing required enormous metabolic maintenance. Carrying that much developed muscle, moving it, powering it through sustained combat, demanded a cost that Bolo's conditioning hadn't fully prepared for. His physique had been built for maximum power output in concentrated bursts. This was something different. This was an endurance question. Bruce showed no equivalent wear. His training philosophy had always prioritized functional efficiency, every element of his physical development serving a combat purpose rather than an aesthetic one. Lean wasn't a style choice, it was a strategic one. Every pound he carried could sustain the pace he was setting without screaming for oxygen it couldn't find. By the 10-minute mark, the fight was over in every way that mattered before anyone said so officially. Bolo's power remained theoretical, devastating in potential, untapped because it could never find its target long enough to deploy. His strikes continued to carry the same force they always had. They simply continued to miss, and his body had reached the place where the gap between what his spirit demanded and what his physiology could deliver had grown too wide to bridge. He conceded, and the room understood what they had witnessed. What changed after that day wasn't animosity. It was something more valuable, genuine mutual respect built on genuine mutual testing. Bolo walked away with a clear-eyed understanding of what his training had not addressed. Endurance, efficiency, the gap between looking like the most dangerous person in the room and being the most dangerous person in the room when the room demands sustained effort. He changed how he trained afterward. Not by abandoning what made him remarkable, that power, that physicality, that mastery of traditional technique, but by building around it. Cardio work he had neglected, endurance development he had deprioritized. He became more complete because he had encountered something that exposed the incompleteness honestly. Bruce walked away with something different. Validation, yes, but more than that, the clarity that comes from testing belief in conditions that don't care about your belief. Jeet Kune Do had always been a claim. Now it was a confirmed observation. Every unconventional decision he had made, training across styles, discarding forms that didn't translate to actual combat, prioritizing functional conditioning over impressive appearance, had been ratified in the most honest laboratory available, a real fight with a real opponent who had real skills and real determination. The witnesses carried this story for decades the way people carry things that mattered, not loudly, not officially, in training rooms, in quiet conversations between people who understood what they were discussing. Young fighters learned from it without knowing exactly where the lesson came from. Train your cardio. Strategy is a weapon. Speed compounds over time in a way that power does not always sustain. Bruce Lee was gone within months of Enter the Dragon's release. The film became legend. The mirror room sequence became cinema history. But for the people who stood in that room and watched the real fight, the unscripted one, the honest one, the one with actual consequences for both men's pride and both men's understanding of themselves, that was the real document. That was the truest record of what Bruce Lee believed and what Bruce Lee could actually do when belief met pressure and had nowhere to hide. The lesson doesn't age. It doesn't belong to 1973, or to martial arts, or to two specific men in a specific room. It belongs to anyone who has ever confused the appearance of strength with the reality of it. Anyone who has built something impressive but not complete. Anyone who has avoided being tested because being tested means the possibility of learning something uncomfortable. Bolo Yeung was genuinely formidable, genuinely skilled, genuinely dangerous, and he was willing to find out where his limits actually were, rather than assume they didn't exist. That took more courage than his physical power ever required. Bruce Lee was right about almost everything he believed, and he knew it was only true because he never stopped testing it. That's the real footage nobody filmed. The test that proved everything.